Parshat Re'eh comprises a large variety of subject matter. In it, Moses begins his review of the legal matter of the Torah's preceding 3 books, covering the laws of sacrifices, idolatry, kashrut, charity, the sabbatical year, slavery, and the festivals. Thus, the focus in this parsha shifts from the basic tenets of Judaism as discussed in the first parshiot of Deuteronomy to the specific duties of the Jew. This focus will remain throughout the next 3 parshiot as well. Good morning, Marion. In this light, the brief introduction at the beginning of the parsha, headed by Moshe's sweeping declaration that yes, we can achieve sight consciousness of divinity after all, is the transitional nexus bridging the first 3 parshiot of Deuteronomy and the following 4, setting the tone for the legal material that follows. We have been promised that we can ultimately receive the divine gift of direct perception in relationship with God. We are then told to respond with renewed ongoing efforts to refine and elevate the world until it too becomes fit to behold divinity directly. Quote, and the glory of God will be revealed, and all flesh will see it together, which comes from the book of Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 5. So again, back to, or to pick up with Nechama Leibowitz, insights into verses 26 and 28. I have set before you a blessing. This Sidra, the first in our book to be largely composed of laws and religious precepts, begins with a passage dealing with the subject of reward and punishment. See, Re'eh, I have set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day. And a curse, if you will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way which I command you this day to go after other gods, which you have not known. That's verses 26 through 28. This passage, which promises blessing to the obedient and threatens the disobedient with a curse, postulates too the fundamental Jewish principle of free will. As I've said many times before, everything is ordained in heaven except the fear of heaven. The Midrash understands the opening words of our text as implying this, which is in Devarim Rabbah, which is the Midrashic book of Devarim. Behold, I have set blessing and a curse, said Rabbi Eliezer, as soon as the Almighty uttered these words at Sinai, quote, out of the mouth of the Most High proceedeth not evil and good, which is in Lamentations, which we read at Tisha B'Av, but evil overtakes those who commit evil, and good those who do good. Many commentators have been puzzled by the fact that the Hebrew word for evil in the text from Lamentations occurs in the plural form, ra'ot, evils, whereas the word for good, tovah, is in the singular. Here is the explanation of the ha'amek devar. So again, in this verse, you would note it's ra'ot, evils, plural, good, tovah, singular. The Almighty, in his abounding grace, provides his creatures with one single good prior to the deed, as an incentive to good works. In view of this, only one good proceeds from the Most High, whereas retribution and sufferings do not proceed from him, but overtake man in direct relationship to his deeds, to his sinful acts. We shall revert to the foregoing idea later. Meanwhile, we shall deal with another apparent anomaly, this time in the opening text. The anomaly is only apparent in the Hebrew, since the English translation does not reflect the discrepancy. The passage states, and if you can read Hebrew, look at verse 26 and 27 and 28, you will see the passage states a blessing. If asher. Now, asher can have many different meanings depending on the context of the sentence. Here it means if you obey. A curse if, and then the English, or in the English it says if, but in Hebrew it says im. So asher in the first, if you obey, im, if you will not obey.
Or sometimes they're close. The ones that were.
I'm sorry? Oh, I thought someone was saying something. The usual reading would have been the conditional im in both cases. The more faithful English rendering would be, quote, a blessing that you obey, a curse if you will not obey, end quote. But what is the point of this variation? Why does the Torah, which has no words that don't have meaning, everything in there has a meaning and a purpose, why would it say asher and im, which English has the same meaning but not in Hebrew? Malbim, you've heard me talk about him before, the great 19th century Jewish commentator who made a study of biblical Hebrew semantics, gives the following explanation. Quote, a blessing that you obey, implying then that the very obedience to the divine commandments constitutes the blessing. Do not imagine that there is any this worldly reward outside the good deed itself. It is not like the case of the master who rewards his servant for loyalty and punishes him for disobedience, where the servant's due is dependent on the master's whim and is not inherent in the action itself. The parallel is to the doctor who assures his patient that he will be well, as long as he adheres to the regimen that he, the doctor, prescribes, and that otherwise he will die. The consequences are here inherent in the deed itself. The idea propounded by Malbim echoes the rabbinic dictum that the reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah. As it says in Pirkei Avot, the reward for a mitzvah is the mitzvah. Virtue is its own reward. But this does not explain why the Torah changes its attitude in respect to sinful deeds and uses the conditional im. Surely it is equally true to state that sin brings its own punishment. The reward of a transgression is a transgression. Baya goes further than Malbim and explains the different implications of asher and im in our context. Quote, im is an expression of doubt, which was therefore inappropriate in connection with obedience to the Torah, but quite appropriate in the context of punishment. The text therefore uses asher, an expression of certainty, with reference to obedience. So asher has an implication of assurance, and that's the message Moses was trying to convey, where im is conditional. In other words, man is not merely confronted by two possibilities. He is exhorted to prefer the first course. I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse, therefore choose life, which is what Moses says later in Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19. Since, however, these two alternatives are in our passage set forth in subordinate clauses of condition that are followed by the main clauses, it is the latter which should provide the clue to interpreting the variation in phraseology. Rashi, with his characteristic brevity, illuminates the obscurity in two Hebrew words. The blessing that ye obey, or you obey on account of that. What is the point of Rashi's comment? To understand it, we must invoke the Talmud, which explains the difference in implication between almanat, on account of that, and im, if. Almanat implies retroactive force. I shall pay you if you perform a certain task. Constitutes an obligation to pay when the work is completed, on performance. I shall pay you on account of the work you perform for me implies a retroactive obligation to pay even before the performance. Let us now apply this distinction to Rashi's comment. Quote, on account of, end quote, is applied to the text. The blessing that you obey. The blessing is given to man on account, even before he has proved himself deserving by obedience to the divine law. The world is founded on divine grace. Chen is grace in Hebrew. Chen v'chesed v'rachamim v'enecha. Chen, grace. At the end of creation, before man came into being, it is stated, quote, and God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good, end quote. This bountiful world was granted to man for him to enjoy and serve his master on condition that he would be obedient to the wishes of his creator, whereas the curse comes only afterwards in the event of man's subsequent disobediences. This is the reason for the divergence of phrasing. The world is not originally evil and full of misfortune to be redeemed by man's own good works. On the contrary, as it says in Psalm 104 and 24, verse 24, how manifold are thy works, O Lord. All of them have thou made in wisdom. All the ugliness and misfortunes are consequences of the evil committed by man. And the curse if you will not obey. The same psalm refers to this, quote, let the sins be consumed out of the earth, and the wicked will be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, end quote. Once human evil has been eradicated, the pristine purity of divine creation will be restored when everything was, quote, made in wisdom, and the state of blessing comes back into its own. Bless the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord. Now we may appreciate the observation of the Ha'amek Devar cited at the beginning, quote, out of the mouth of the Lord proceedeth not evils and good, end quote. Since man himself is responsible for the evils, man, not God. Good is in the singular, however, since there is one supreme good which proceeds from God, and that is the good granted to mankind beforehand in anticipation of its obedience. So when man seeks to be good, he is rewarded. When man seeks to do evil, he is not stopped. And evil begets evil. So when people ask, how could God do this to me? How could God do this to us? It's not God. If we would have no free will otherwise. And this is the choice that we are given, blessing or curse. The reward of a mitzvah, God gives you what you need to perform another mitzvah. If you use that for evil or for bad, God doesn't stop you. But that is how the universe was constructed. See, re'eh, means literally give. A gift is an unearned bestowal. God gave us this beautiful world and all of creation before we had done anything to deserve it or through our own rewards. That is the beauty of the gift of re'eh. Now, The blessing and a curse, if you read ahead, you know it's going to be pronounced on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. Rashi has this to say. Look, I place a blessing and a curse to be pronounced at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal. The actual blessing and curse are not placed before them here, as they are not mentioned in this chapter. Rather, placing before them refers to the arrangement that they be pronounced at Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, as stated in verse 29. Now, Hertz has this to say about verse 26, I said before you. Both as individuals and as a nation, they were endowed with free will. And the choice between the two ways rested with themselves. All that Moses could do was clearly to define the alternatives and point out whither each of them led. So, let us look at verse 29. The two mountains. Here we are. When Adonai your God has brought you to the land that you are coming to inherit, you shall place the blessers on Mount Gerizim and the cursers on Mount Ebal. Now, Rashi has this to say. You shall place the blessers, not the blessing. That is intangible and cannot be placed. So it's not the blessings that are going to be on Mount Gerizim, but the blessers towards Mount Gerizim, but not on the mountain. The Levites who pronounced the blessings and curses stood between the mountains. And they turned their faces and opened with the blessing. A blessing and a curse indicates that the blessing is first. Blessed is the man who does not make a sculptured or molten image, blah, etc., etc. All the curses in that chapter 27, verse 15 through 26, the Tochacha, only the curses are mentioned explicitly, since the purpose was for the Israelites to accept them as punishment for violating the Torah. Still, the blessings preceded them in order to open the assembly on a meritorious note. So, moving on, verses 30 through 32, I'm going to read from the Kohot Torah for the additional insights that it provides. Verse 30. Aren't these mountains on the other side of the Yarden River? Further on from the river in the direction of the sunset, i.e. westward, in the land of the Canaanites who dwell in the plain beyond Gilgal, next to the plains of Moreh at Shechem. 31. For you are crossing the Yarden River in order to enter and take possession of the land that God your God is giving you. The miraculous way you will cross the river will assure you that you will indeed take possession of the land and settle it, no matter how impossible a feat it may presently seem. Motivated by verse 32, motivated by these blessings and curses, you must safeguard your ability to fulfill all the rules and ordinances that I am setting before you today by constantly studying the Torah's instructions regarding how to perform them. So it's apparent that they're not going to be on either side of the mountain with the Levites in the middle, since they're on the other side of the Yarden. So until Joshua takes them into Canaan, that's when this actually would take place. So we now turn to chapter 12. What is it about? Eradicating idolatry. Oh my God, Stuart. Isn't that what God keeps telling us and keeps telling us? Well, evidently we didn't listen too well, did we? Verse 1. These are the statutes and the laws. Ha-chukim v'ha-mishpatim, that you will guard to fulfill in the land that Adonai, God of your forefathers, has given you to inherit, all the years that you were alive on the land. So again, the laws didn't apply, the mitzvot didn't apply until they entered the land. That's why there was no Pesach other than the first one when the Jews were redeemed, until Joshua took the people into Canaan. One of the first things they did was Brit Milah, because all the males needed to be circumcised. And secondly, observe the Pesach. Verse 2. You must obliterate all the places where the nations worshipped, whom you are inheriting their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, and under every evergreen tree. Now, Hertz has this to say about the rehearsal of the code. At this point, we pass to the code of laws. All that has gone before may be regarded as the religious and historical prelude to the rehearsal of the statutes and judgments which now follow. So far, Moses had been speaking in general terms of the necessity of obedience to the laws of God, reminding them of the covenant of Horeb, which is Sinai, and the fundamental principles of Israel's religion. He now proceeds to give detailed laws and precepts that were to govern their lives in the land of promise. These laws deal with religious institutions and worship, government of the people, criminal law, domestic life, conclusion of the code, which is first fruits, tithes, and accompanying prayers. Some commentators detect in all these chapters an elaboration of the basic laws contained in the Decalogue. Thus, 12 through 14, chapters 12 through 14, deal with the worship of God and our expansion of the first three of the Ten Commandments. In verses 15 to 16 and 17, we have the enumeration of holy festivals analogous to the sacred day of the week. Chapters 16 through 18 deal with civil and religious government, which plays the same part in the national life as the authority of parents plays in the life of the family. The remainder of the section corresponds generally to the second half of the Decalogue and treats the relationship of man to his fellow man, Bein Adam Lachervo. Verse 3. You are to break apart their altars, smash their pillars, and their asherahs. You are to burn in fire, and the statues of their gods you are to cut down. You are to obliterate their name from that place. Now, the asherahs were trees on hills that were worshipped by the Canaanites. And they're mentioned several times, not just in the Chumash, but in the prophets. Verse 4. I'm going to read verse 4 out of the Kohot Torah. You must not do so to God your God. On the contrary, you must treat his name with respect, not even erasing it from any inscribed tablet or written document. Likewise, you must not destroy his altar, neither directly by dismantling it or indirectly by imitating the behavior of idolatrous nations. When the priests accepted sacrifices from the Roman governors, That was like destroying the altar. It was the same thing, thereby forfeiting the merit of the tabernacle or temple's presence and causing it to be destroyed by invading foreign armies. Now, Hertz has this to say about that, which is what he says more eloquently than I can say. The Israelites were not like the Canaanites to worship God on the, quote, high mountains and under every green tree, end quote, but were to do so in a central sanctuary, as stated in the following verse. Some rabbis, however, connected this verse with the one immediately preceding and deduced therefrom the prohibition to obliterate in any way the divine name in a scroll or book. If you recall, Rabbi Epstein, when he was talking about the Shema and he was writing, he did not write God's name, Yud He Vav He, but Yud Ke Vav Ke, because that would be, he would have to retain that. He could not destroy it. In later ages, it became customary to bury disused Hebrew books, so as not to dispose of them in any way that could involve destroying something containing a divine name. Hence the institution of the Geniza in Eastern Jewish communities, and the periodic burial of disused, tattered, and fragmentary books of scripture and devotion in Russo-Polish Jewries. Now, if you've ever, there's two good books on the Geniza. The one they discovered from the time of the Rambam. And what a slice of life of Jewish history at that time. There were wills, there were legal papers, there were writings of the Rambam, Maimonides in this Geniza. In fact, in Israel at the History Museum in Jerusalem, you can see parts of the Geniza. There are Genizas in Tarrant County and books from Beth Shalom, Sidurim, whatever. Cantor Allen takes from time to time, before the pandemic, of course, to Ahavat Shalom for burial in their Geniza. So, God's name is sacred. We do not obliterate God's name. We respect his name. Verse 5. Rather, at the place that Adonai your God chooses from all your tribes to set his presence there. You will seek his presence and come there. Now, I want to read, well, first I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to read a closer look from the Kohot Torah. The Israelites were not like the Canaanites to worship God on the high mountains and under every green tree, but were to do so in a central sanctuary, as I said before, but it bears repeating. So the closer look looks at the verse, the place that God will select. When the Jewish people entered the land of Israel in the year, well, their years don't correspond with scholar years, but in the land of Israel, they set up the tabernacle at Gilgal, which of course had supreme importance in the time of Joshua and Samuel. It remained standing there for 14 years. It was then transferred to Shiloh, where stone walls were built to replace the gold-plated wooden walls of the tabernacle, but the three original coverings were still used for the roof. So the curtains that existed in the Mishkan were put on the tabernacle at Shiloh. And that's, it stood for 369 years. That was the central sanctuary that God spoke of. First Gilgal, then Shiloh, but until the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant and destroyed the sanctuary. The tabernacle was then reconstructed at Nov, N-O-V, Nov, where it stood for 13 years, when it was relocated to Givon, where it stood for 44 years, when construction began on the first temple in Jerusalem. And that, of course, is the famous Haftorah, when David HaMelech took the ark in a wagon to bring to Jerusalem, and the wagon tipped on the hill, and Uzziah reached out to right the wagon and was zapped instantly. David got nervous, kept it at Evedi Dom, the Gittite, where he stayed there for 3 months, and then they brought the ark into Jerusalem. Although the Philistines returned the ark a few months after they had captured it, it was not brought to the tabernacle at Nov, but rather kept first at Beit Shemesh. Now, Beit Shemesh means house of the sun. Beit, house, Shemesh, sun. And then at Kiryat Ye'arim. King David then brought it from Kiryat Ye'arim to Jerusalem, which is the story I just relayed to you a moment ago. The tabernacle at Shiloh had the status of an interim sanctuary, and thus as long as it stood, it was forbidden to offer up private sacrifices on private altars. In the periods before and after it functioned, however, when the tabernacle stood at Gilgal, Nov, and Givon, private altars were permitted, because the ark of the tabernacle wasn't located there. Nonetheless, even when it was standing, the status of the tabernacle at Shiloh was inferior to that of the later permanent temple in Jerusalem. God's primary purpose in singling out Shiloh was to end decentralized sacrifice. In order to accomplish this, it was necessary to provide a fixed locale for centralized worship. In contrast, Jerusalem was selected as the locus of intrinsic holiness, the site for the revelation of the divine presence. And this choice, ipso facto, rendered it the locale for all sacrificial rites. It is for this reason that despite its quasi-permanence, the establishment of the sanctuary at Shiloh did not invalidate private altars for all time, whereas the establishment of the temple at Jerusalem did. And even then, there were exceptions. Eliyahu Hanavi, the famous confrontation with the priests of Baal. He offered that sacrifice outside of the temple of Jerusalem. But only under certain circumstances was that ever permitted. And certainly the prophet had God's blessing for that. So, let us move on. Verse 6. And here is another statement which confirms what I basically just read. You are to bring there your burnt offerings and your sacred offerings, your tithes, and the elevation of your hands, and your pledges, and your donations, the firstborn of your cattle, and your flocks. Verse 7. You are to eat there before Adonai your God, and you will be happy with the sum of your handiwork, you and your households, as has blessed you Adonai your God. So those sacrifices that were to be brought to the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, as you already know, were permitted to be consumed by the family that brought those particular sacrifices. As long as they were within the walls of Jerusalem, it was permitted. So verses 8 through 14 deal with private altars to be prohibited. So again, 8 and 9, I'm reading from Kahot Torah. This restriction will not apply to the periods in which the tabernacle is located at a temporary site, as opposed to the interim, which was Shiloh, or permanent site, Jerusalem. Thus, from the time you cross the Jordan River until the interim site is established, you will be permitted to set up private altars. Nonetheless, you must not act with regard to these private altars in the same way we do here today with the tabernacle's altar, sacrificing both voluntary and obligatory offerings on them. Rather, you may only offer up on them those sacrifices that every person deems appropriate on his own, i.e., voluntary offerings. So only the voluntary offerings could be done on private altars. The obligatory offerings still had to be done at the interim or the permanent site. You will still have to offer up your obligatory offerings in the tabernacle, even though it is located at a temporary site. Verse 9. You will be allowed to set up and use private altars because you will not yet have come either to the first interim resting place of the tabernacle, nor to the final permanent inheritance that God your God is giving you for the purpose of establishing his temple. Once either of these structures is standing, however, the use of private altars will be forbidden. Once the interim sanctuary ceases to function, however, you will again be permitted to offer up voluntary sacrifices on private altars, such as Nov, Givon, and what was the other one? Kiryat, well, I can't right now. Kiryat Ye'arim, until the permanent sanctuary is established. So even though the ground rules are being laid for the prohibition of private altars, God allowed certain exceptions, but again, only toward voluntary offers. So, verse 10, when you cross the Yarden and settle in the land that Adonai your God is apportioning to you, and he has granted you peace from your enemies all around, and you will live secure. 11. Let it be that the place where Adonai your God chooses to place his presence therein, it is there you shall bring all that I am commanding you, your burnt offerings, your holy offerings, your tithes, your hand offerings, your hand offerings, your choice promissory offerings that you pledge to God. Now Rashi has this to say about let that be the place, etc. Build for yourselves the chosen sanctuary in Jerusalem. This is as it is said concerning David, quote, it was when the king had settled in his palace that Adonai had granted him peace on every side from all his enemies. Then the king said to the prophet Nathan, look here, I am settled in a place of cedar wood while the ark of God languishes amidst curtains, which is a famous line, I believe, in 1 Kings. Don't quote me on that. Okay. Verse 12. You are to rejoice in the presence of Adonai your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male slaves, your female slaves, the Levite who is in your cities, for he has no portion or territory with you. We know that because their duty and obligations were to God as an intermediary between the people and Hashem. They were given cities of refuge and had land around there, but they depended on the people to provide them with their means and their sustenance. Verse 13. Take heed. Take heed. Hashamar lecha, lest you offer up your burnt offerings anywhere you envision as proper. So Hertz has this to say about that. not that thou seest as suitable for that purpose, but only as a prophet sees for thee, as Elijah did at Mount Carmel, which I pointed out previously. So, verse 14, to reiterate about the prohibition of private altars, solely in the place that Adonai chooses within one of your tribes. There are you to offer up your burnt offerings, and there are you to do everything that I am commanding you. Now, David had purchased that land, the threshing floor, in the tribe of Benjamin from the Jebusites, which you can read all about in the prophetic books. Verses 15 through 19 are an extension of prohibition of the private sanctuary. Even the mere eating of sacrificial foods is forbidden outside the city of the central sanctuary. So verse 15, I'm going to read again from Kohot. However, if an animal that has been designated to be offered up as a sacrifice becomes blemished in such a way that permanently disqualifies it from being used as a sacrifice, you may redeem it by buying it back from the temple treasury. And then, as much as you desire, you may slaughter and eat its meat in any of your cities outside the temple city, as long as you take care to eat meat according to your means, i.e., not beyond the blessing of wealth that God your God gave you. So, you bring this goat, ram, sheep, somehow it got blemished. Maybe its tongue got split, or something fell on it, injuring and marking its skin. You could redeem it from the temple treasury, and then you could eat that meat wherever you wanted to eat it. 16. Here is a very famous verse. You know what? I didn't, excuse me, 16. However, you may not eat the blood. On the earth you are to spill it like water. So, Rashi has this to say. Although I have stated that its blood is not to be sprinkled on the altar, thus allowing for the presumption that it may be eaten on the premise that only blood suitable for sprinkling on the altar is forbidden, you may not eat it. Although Vayikra, chapter 17, verse 10, has already prohibited the blood of a non-sacrificial animal, our prohibition is necessary to include a permanently blemished animal ineligible for sacrificial sanctity. So, verse 17. You are not permitted to eat in your cities the tithe of your grain, and your wine, and your olive oil, and the firstborn of your cattle and your flocks, and all your pledges that you pledge, and your donations, and the truma, separation of your hand. Hertz has this to say. Mention of burnt offerings and sacrifices is omitted from the list, because these could only be eaten by the priests within the temple precincts, whereas the other sacred foods could be eaten anywhere within the limits of the holy city. So again, as long as you were within the walls of Jerusalem, it was permitted. It gets a little confusing, I understand. Especially since there's no temple, no central sanctuary, and hasn't been for 2,000 years. So some of these verses are a little hard to relate to, but it all comes down to blessing and curse, obeying or choosing not to obey, and the choices that we make and the consequences that will happen because of those choices that we make. Now, verse 18. Rather, before Adonai your God, you are to eat it. And of course, before Adonai your God means within the central sanctuary, within the walls of Jerusalem, in the place that Adonai your God chooses. You and your son and your daughter, your female slave, or your male slave, female slave, the Levites in your city, you will be happy in the presence of Adonai your God with the sum of your handiwork. So again, before Adonai means within the walls of Jerusalem. Watch yourself, verse 19, lest you forsake the Levite all your years on your land. So always remember the Levites, who of course were charged with teaching Torah to the masses. It was the Levites who were the rabbis of the day. They were the teachers. And again, they were the intermediary between Israel and Hashem in the holy sanctuary. So verses 20 through 22 have to do with the slaughter of animals for food. 20. When Adonai your God expands your border as he promised you, and you say, quote, I would like to eat meat, end quote, because you have an appetite to eat meat to the full extent of your appetite, eat meat. So Hertz says on page 803, the slaughter of animals for food. In Leviticus chapter 17, it is laid down that every animal, even for ordinary consumption, must be slain at the entrance of the tent of meeting. This was a temporary precept for the period of the Israelites' sojourn in the wilderness. This precept is replaced by another in this chapter of Deuteronomy. Israel was now about to settle in Canaan, and the individual Israelite could not be expected to go to the central sanctuary in Shiloh or Jerusalem whenever he wished to partake of meat food. So when all the tribes are circled around the Mishkan, and it was the center, literally, of their universe, yeah, they had to bring the meat to the Mishkan. But when they conquered the land of Canaan, and they were dispersed within their lands by tribes, the non-sacrificial meat, can you imagine the hardship? Anytime you wanted a hamburger, you had to bring it, the cow to Jerusalem. So Moses, of course, God allows for that. And he tells us in verse 21, when the place is distant from you that Adonai your God chooses to set his presence there, you may slaughter some of the cattle or your flocks that Adonai gave you as I have commanded you, and you will eat in your cities with all your appetite. As I've said many times, we are nothing if not a practical religion. Now, this is very interesting. And let me say this again. That Adonai gave you as I have commanded you. Well, where is it commanded? It's not in the Torah. There's nowhere in the written Torah that the commandment is given for shechita. So, Hertz, this cannot refer, as in the case, that case, the verb would not be in the perfect tense, but the participle would be used. Tradition connects as I have commanded you with the words, thou shalt kill. We have thus an indication that Moses had previously taught the people a method of slaughtering animals, shechita. Since this is nowhere mentioned in the Bible, it follows that shechita, the Jewish method of slaughter, must have been communicated orally to Israel. So again, here's another instance where you cannot understand the Torah with just the written text. It's like pedaling a bike with one foot. You have to have the oral Torah. So it's obvious when Moses said that you shall kill as I have commanded you, but that commandment is not elucidated in the written text, that it was communicated orally. Verse 22. I'm going to read that verse from, bear with me just a moment. Here we go. Verse 22, Kahos Torah. But just as was stated with regard to consecrated animals that became permanently blemished, the meat of this animal is not subject to the restrictions of purity imposed upon eating sacrificial meat. You may eat it just as gazelle and deer, species of animals that are not offered up as sacrifices, are eaten. Remember, they're kosher. They have cloven hoof and chew a cud, but they're not animals that are brought as sacrifices. Both ritually impure people, tahor, and ritually pure people may eat it together because, again, it's not in the temple precinct, even if thereby the meat becomes ritually defiled. Nonetheless, when you eat cattle or sheep, you are still forbidden to eat the fats that would have been offered up on the altar if the animal had been sacrificed as a peace offering, even though these same fats from wild animals such as gazelle and deer are permitted for consumption. And that's easy to understand. Deer and gazelle are not required animals for sacrifice. Oxen, cattle, sheep, and ram are. So those fats, which would have been offered up on the altar if it was not a blemished animal, cannot be eaten either way. So now a very famous verse. Well, actually, verses 23 through 28 are warnings against blood. So let's look at verse 23. Only exercise strength in not eating the blood, for the blood is the life. Very famous verse. So do not eat the spirit with the meat. Remember, when Cain murdered Havel and buried him in the ground, his blood cried out to God. The blood is the life. The blood is the spirit. It's the physical manifestation of the soul. So pagans drank blood, used blood in their rites. And if you've ever watched any program about the Vikings, that was an integral part because they knew that the blood was the spirit. Look at Dracula. It's all about the blood, baby. So Hertz, the blood is the life. The rabbis understood this as meaning that it is forbidden to eat a limb torn from a living animal, which is one of the 7 Noahide laws. You are not permitted to eat the limb from that was torn from an animal. And as you know, with kashrut, they salt the meat to get all the blood out. And that's why in many kosher homes, you're never going to see rare meat. It's all pretty much well done. You don't want the blood because the blood is the life. So verses 24 and 25, again from Kahos. Secondly, you must also not consume the blood that oozes out of the carcass after the initial spurt accompanying slaughtering. Rather, you must spill it into the ground like water. Verse 25. And furthermore, you must not even consume the blood remaining in the animal's body after slaughtering if the blood leaves its location in the animal's body, for example, by cooking. You must therefore either salt the meat on an inclined surface so the blood is drawn out and drains, or roast it so the blood drains. Think of Pesach. God commanded that the lamb be roasted, not boiled, not baked, roasted, again, to draw out the blood. If you eat the meat raw, however, you do not have to remove this type of blood. But I'm sure that was probably frowned upon. Steak tartare was probably not on many Jewish menus. Refrain from consuming blood in order that it go well for you and your children after you when you do what is proper in the eyes of God. And if God promises to reward you refraining from consuming blood, something to which people are naturally averse, it follows that he will reward you even more generously for observing commandments that require effort and discipline. So we have a natural instinct of aversity to drinking blood, and God rewards us for something that we find repugnant to begin with. Think how much more he'll reward us if we do something that actually requires effort and self-discipline. Besides his promise of reward, God is exhorting you emphatically and repeatedly not to consume blood for two reasons. First, you were accustomed to consuming blood before the Torah was given. And even though most of those who were alive then have since died, and the rest of you have been observing the prohibition against eating blood for 40 years now, he sees that it is still difficult for you. Secondly, people normally have no desire to drink blood. The fact that God nonetheless warns you to stay away from it teaches you how carefully you should avoid forbidden things that people normally are attracted to, like pork. Yes, Cookie.
I have a question.
I hope I have the answer.
Does it say anywhere in the Torah when it talks about the rules of kosher how you're supposed to kill, or maybe I missed it, how you're supposed to kill those animals that you eat?
That's in the oral Torah. As I said, the whole process of shechita, which is ritual slaughter for kosher animals, was transmitted orally.
It's also in the Torah, because if you remember and I think it was in Leviticus, they talk about how to slaughter animals and talk about how the priest is to slaughter animals. And one of the points they make is that they talk about the priest, they don't have to use a knife to slaughter birds. They can do it with a fingernail. So
their fingernail.
They do. Wait a minute. What now? They
to kill a bird, a Levite had to use his thumbnail to sever the neck, but it was to be attached. It couldn't be disattached.
Okay.
You asked.
I know. I just remember as a kid growing
Be careful
up,
what you asked for, my dear.
Yeah. I just remember as a kid growing up, we would go to my cousin's farm and get a box of chickens live and take them to the kosher butcher in Lexington. And we would wait there while he took them to the shed in the back. He'd tie their feet together and hung them on a pole.
Right.
And, said, Baruch atah Adonai, I don't know, and then slit their neck with a knife. And I'm never going to get that
image
out of my head. Anyway, I was just curious. So,
and many who grew up on farms, and I'll never forget when I was in first grade, we went to visit a farm, and I saw for the first time 2 cows making a 3rd cow, which I had never seen before. I was a city boy, and he also cut the head of a chicken, and of course it's running around with, like the old saying, running around like a chicken with its head cut off, because the nerve endings are still working. So, and thank you for asking that question. I was wondering if Ken was still alive, because he hadn't participated once yet, and that's so unlike Ken. And you asked a question that motivated him to respond. So thank you.
I'm just tired today. It's a bad day.
You're entitled, sir.
I think part of the rules of kashrut, as far as slaughtering an animal, is that it has to be done very quickly, and all the
Yes.
blood has to be let out immediately, that no blood can remain. So it has to be done
Correct.
as humanely as possible.
That is correct and bears repeating. Thank you.
And even when we went to the kosher butcher, my mother would bring everything home and we would put it, we would take it down into our cellar and she would salt everything, even though, it was killed properly, but she would still salt it. And years later, when she developed a heart condition, she had to give up eating kosher meat because there was so much salt in it.
Yes,
Weird.
Jewish food has, think about the schmaltz that your mother or grandmother may have kept on the stove.
Yeah.
I can still remember going to my grandmother's in that old iron skillet, and she'd take a dollop of the schmaltz, and anything she cooked, that went in that skillet.
Yeah.
And forgive me, but that stuff had killed more Jews than Hitler. I don't mean any disrespect, but how much, think of the heart issues that people had because of all that chicken fat.
Wow.
So anyway, we're coming to the end of our Torah portion for the first triennial, verses 26 through 28. So I'm going to read them now. Then we'll open the floor for comments, questions, and then after that, we'll dive into the Haftorah. 26. However, your sacred offerings that you will have and your pledges you are to bring when you come to the place that Adonai chooses. Again, it's repeatedly emphasizing the place that God chooses for his presence to dwell. Think of Parshat Trumah, when God says, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell among or within you. And that's what God's presence is all about. Not dwelling in a material place, but dwelling within the community, among the community, and within each of us. Verse 27. You are to execute your burnt offerings, the meat and the blood on the altar that Adonai your God, and the blood that your peace offerings will be poured on the altar of Adonai your God. Then you will eat the meat. Now think about it. The priest is sprinkling this blood 7 times against the altar. So again, the blood is the life. God was creating a transitional period, if you will, from the pagan sacrifices of humans and animals to this transitional period. If someone brings a sin offering or a guilt offering and has to view the animal being slaughtered in front of them, the blood sprinkled on the altar, hopefully it makes enough of an impact, like Cookie's image of her childhood on her father's farm, that still resonates so vividly within her that you'll think twice before you sin or you do something that you may feel guilty of. Engage in Lashon Hara, etc. 28. Preserve and heed all these words that I am commanding you, in order that you have it good and your children after you forever. When you do that which is good and that which is upright in the eyes of Adonai, your God. That's where we end today. So actually the first triennial were the first 2 aliyot. So if you were going to finish reading the chapter, it will pick up with the 3rd aliyah, chapter 20 or verse 29. Any questions or comments, insights on the Torah portion before we transition into the Haftorah?
Okay.
Our Haftorah this morning is the third Haftorah of consolation. Again, from the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah, which continues the prophetic consolation over the destruction of the Holy Temple. Isaiah is exhorting the exiled population that indeed Israel's history did not end. As I promised you through my prophet Jeremiah, you will return. I exhort you to return. As we read last week, where's the bill of divorce? God did not divorce his people. So, and Ken says he just sent the laws concerning what is allowed to speak Lashon, I think he meant Lashon Hara, but
Yeah,
in any event, if you, as I have pointed out many times before, the Chofetz Chaim, Rabbi Israel Meyer Kagan, is the master. His seminal work was concerning the laws of Lashon Hara. This is a daily guide. So, for instance, today is 20 of Av, and it continues day by day. You can get this, and I've sent the link before, anywhere. Google it. I'm sure Amazon, or I buy it on the Feldheim Press, Feldheim, Feldheim.
or you can
Costs
find it on,
about $15.
or you can find it on ou.org.
Or u.org. And how appropriate, starting with 1 Elul. Well, actually, I would urge you to start tomorrow or today, but how appropriate to study the laws of Lashon Hara, the evil tongue, Rechilus, tale-bearing, or Motzi Shem Ra, rumor-mongering. Refining one's speech, as the sages tell us, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. If only more people, myself included, would remember that. We all fall short. But during this period of Chashbon HaNefesh, accounting of the soul, much of the damage in relationships comes through Lashon Hara, or poor or lack of communication. So, getting back to Isaiah, which, by the way, on Hertz is on page 818. We will study Yeshayahu chapter 54, verse 11 through chapter 55, verse 5. So I want to read the overview. It's brief from Hertz about this Haftorah. This is the third of the Haftorahs of consolation. Its central promise is, no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment, you shall condemn. The fulfillment of this promise is dependent on Israel's right choice in regard to the 2 ways. And by now you know the 2 ways, blessing or curse. Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse, with which the Sidra opens. So there is indeed a thematic connection in addition to being the third Haftorah of consolation. So verses 11 through 17 deal with the outer and inner splendor of Zion. Verses 11 through 13 I'm going to read, and then I have some commentary about that. So verse 11. You poor one, tempest tossed, never comforted. Behold, If I were to cover your stones with stones of azure and establish you upon sapphires, verse 12, if I were to set rubies in your light fixtures and your gates in garnet stones, and if your entire land would become like precious stones, 13, and all your children will be instructed by God, then the peace of your children will be great. So Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch has this to say. In the following verses, the prophet views Israel's nocturnal periods and encourages the people to find comfort in the divine promise to remain conscious of its special mission. If I, God, in one stroke were to put an end to your poverty and helplessness and shower upon you all the riches that you could possibly envision, which is the metaphor of the different gems that Isaiah speaks of, if your hopes for the future were magically to be realized as the radiance of sunlight fills the earth, if your social and cultural lives were rich and fulfilling, and the beauty of your homeland would reflect the splendor of precious jewels, all of this would still not bring you true happiness. Only when your children will become God's disciples and their whole existence will be shaped by the will of God, then theirs will be blessing, well-being, fortune, and finally, true peace. Then, as our sages in Brachot 64a, which is in the Talmud, the first book, so movingly comment, your children will become true builders of God's realm. Then they will secure man's peace and blessing. Only inner peace, the inner satisfaction and contentment of having lived up to the divinely ordained duties, can achieve this goal. Now, Hertz, on page 818, has this to say about verse 13. All your children shall be taught of the Lord. Or, all your children shall be disciples of the Lord. Zion's peace will be based not on armed force, but on the God-fearing lives of all its inhabitants. Israel, with all its armies, with the IDF, with all its technology and armaments, without applying the will of God, and I wish some of those secular politicians in Israel would understand this. Yes, and all the victories that we've had, certainly Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, is why we've had it. It would be much speedier if we would obey the will of God. In some ancient manuscripts, the second word for thy children, benayich, in this verse was read as bonayich, thy builders. So remember, verbs are verbs, A-E-I-O-U, are not in Hebrew, and so you can put whatever verb you want in the word and
Vowels.
change its meaning.
Vowels, not verbs.
Vowels, excuse me. Thank you. That's the word I was searching for. Vowels. Vowels can be transferred. This proclaims a wonderful truth. The children of a nation are the builders of its future, and every Jewish child must be reared to become such a builder of his people's better future. This verse, all thy children shall be taught of the Lord, is an important landmark in the history of civilization. In obedience to it, Israel led the way in universal education. Thus, in his History of the World, H.G. Wells records, quote, the Jewish religion, because it was a literature-sustained religion, led to the first efforts to provide elementary instruction for all the children of the community. So it wasn't the Greeks who brought schools to the world. It was the Jews. But as I often say, people of the book doesn't mean we read a lot of novels. People of the book means we read and study Torah, and we teach this to our children. So, verse 14. With fulfillment of duty, you will strengthen your existence. So if you treat your children and make them the builders of the future, you will strengthen your existence. Keep yourself away from wrongdoing, for you have nothing to fear, nor should you feel terror, for it shall not come near you. 15. Behold, is there then truly anything to fear besides me, capital M? Who is there with you to fear? Who would fall upon you? So if you follow my will, walk in my ways, as FDR said, we have nothing to fear but fear itself and God. Verse 16. Behold, I have created the craftsman who fans the fire of coals and brings forth the tool for his work. And I have created the harbinger of destruction to facilitate birth. The expression heen, which is the first word in verse 16, as it is written here, is usually identical with hane. Behold, hine, excuse me. As the word in our verse, it likely means yes, in the sense of confirmation. So yes, I have created the craftsman. It is always true, eternal reality, even when noted only later, that it is I, God, who am close to you with my all-embracing love. The evil committed by your enemies becomes in my hand an educational tool to strengthen you in fulfilling your moral obligations. The blacksmith who uses all his energy to stir the fire, which helps him to produce the tool used for your destruction, is himself the tool created by me. I make him the tool. I use him to expedite the beginning of a new life for you and all mankind. The responsibility of this is no less upon him, even though, albeit unknown to him, God transformed his evil into a means to effect the good. So the exile, which was punishment, was the blacksmith, the tool that God created to bring the Jews back to him. Now, verse 17, the last verse in chapter 54. Every tool forged against you will not succeed, and every tongue rising against you to dispute, you will condemn. This is the inheritance of servants of God. This is a theme that Isaiah uses. Remember last week I pointed out there were 4 times in the verse, those verses where Isaiah mentioned servants of the Lord. And their fulfillment of duty comes from me, capital M, said God. You will be able to lead your lives without fear. Israel's vindication in history is assured. Neither might nor malice can destroy the servant of the Lord. Now, last week I told you I used the wrong terminology. I said prophetic tense. Actually, it's called confidence tense. And the prophet and the psalmist use the confidence tense to speak of something that will happen in the future in using past tense. Because God said it, it will be done. So, unfortunately, I don't have enough knowledge of Hebrew and the tense structure of Hebrew to pick up on that, and that's why I depend on the commentaries to point this out to me. But that's what confidence tense means. So the chapter 55 is the return of Zion, should also be a return to God. So just as you will return physically to Jerusalem, God wants you to return mentally, psychologically, spiritually. to him. Verse 1. Alas, for every thirsty one, go to the water. Even for one with no money, go, buy and enjoy. Go again, buy, not for money and not for money's worth, wine and milk. So what does that mean? Well, water is a metaphor for Torah. Etz Chaim, tree of life, but Chaim Mayim, the waters of life. Torah is a metaphor for life. For as water is vital to physical life, Torah is vital to spiritual existence. So Hertz has this to say: a call for rich and poor alike to participate in the blessings of the new era by coming to the source, capital S, whence the knowledge of duty springs, the word of the Lord. The cry is like that of the water carrier in eastern cities, and blessings are expressed in Oriental imagery in terms of quickening water, nourishing milk, and gladdening wine. One cannot fail to perceive the note of wistfulness in the appeal, suggestive of the dread of an unspeakable disappointment. So water, milk, and wine refresh the body and gladden the spirit. Again, go ahead, Ken.
I was just going to say in Parshmos, at the beginning, when right after the Israelites left Egypt and they were in the desert, and they went 3 days without water, and when they got to Marah, they found the bitter water, but the 3 days without water actually referred to 3 days without Torah. So there is a definite relationship there.
It's so sad when we see people, and it doesn't matter whether they're Jewish or not, because God speaks to all people in different ways. But when we see people who are spiritually dead or spiritually unreceptive because the disappointments in their life, the sorrows and tragedies one has endured, again, I compare it to an onion. And here's the core of the onion, and with each tragedy, another layer. With each disappointment, another layer. With each death of a beloved, another layer. And to such a point that we forget the spiritual essence that resides within us. Something sparks that, Baruch Hashem, please God, that little by little we can remove those layers and get back to that core, that essence. And by that arousal from below, create that arousal from above that connects us to God Almighty. And then the waters of life. There's two ways to communicate with God. Prayer is when we speak to God. Torah is when God speaks to us. You can't have one without the other. It's like having the written Torah without the oral Torah. Both are vital components to having a relationship with the Almighty. Okay, moving on. Verse 2. Why would you weigh out money for something that is not bread, and your hard-gotten gains for something that does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and enjoy the good, that your soul may delight in the fullness. So what is he saying? What is the prophet saying here? There's no substitute for the blessing emanating from the faithful obedience to divine teachings. Only then will the Jews experience the deep satisfaction from all their labors. Verse 3. Bend your ear and come to me. Listen, that your soul be revived, and I will establish a covenant with you forever. The loving deeds of David, the proven ones, Again, an arousal from below. Bend your ear and come to me. And if you do, I will reciprocate. I will come to you. But it's also here the promise that the Davidic kingdom will endure. David, the proven ones. So 2 more verses. 4. Behold, I have set him up as a witness for the peoples, a prince and dutiful guide to the nations. Now Hertz has this to say. David, or the representative of David's family, which at that time was Zerubbabel, who was from a family of Judah, from David's family, and was appointed as governor by Nebuchadnezzar over Jerusalem, or excuse me, by Cyrus, not the Babylonians. And many people were hoping that Zerubbabel would establish the kingdom of Judah. But needless to say, that would have not been the politically correct thing to do. But Zerubbabel was the governor and the Davidic line. The leader of the returning exiles was Zerubbabel, was the leader of the returning exiles, as was Nehemiah, or Ezra and Nehemiah. So we follow, now we finish with verse 5. Behold, you will call a people that you do not know, and a people that did not know you will rush to you. So the Goyim, the other nations, for the sake of God, your God, and to the Holy One of Israel, for he will then have endowed you with glory. Following in David's footsteps, you, Israel, are chosen to win over nations unknown to you for the spiritual gift of divine truth. When we as Jews stand up for what we believe, we get the respect of the other nations. When we are apologetic or ashamed by virtue of our Judaism, that's when we're treated with contempt. And it's proven over time, over the centuries, over the millennia. That's the message of Isaiah, Yeshayahu. Next week, Shoftim, the judges' judgments. Any questions, comments, insights? Wow. Okay. Very good. I wish everyone a Shavua Tov, a good week. And again, I would ask Cookie and Janet to stay on just for a moment so I can discuss something with you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
Stuart.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good week.
Take care,
Tov.
Shirley.
Bye, Shirley.
Goodbye.
Bye,
Thank
Phil.
you.
Bye, Drew.
So what I was going to ask is, starting next week, Randy's delivering the supplemental booklets of 50 copies to the office.
Okay.
And the Maxirim are there. And as I stated in my July 1 letter, and will now come out weekly in the Friday announcements, we're asking for people who wish to pick up Maxirim and the supplemental booklet to schedule a time with Teresa in the office so she can coordinate who comes by and manage that and keep a list of who checks out what so we know where our books are.
Right.
And we're offering up to 4 books for family and 1 supplemental book per family. But in the event that some in this shelter in place do not want to leave their home,
You need
I
us
was
to deliver.
hopeful that the caring committee could coordinate that with Teresa and doorstep deliver among your committee members, depending on how many people ask for that and where they live, the delivery of that.
I'll check and see where zip code we all live in, and this way I can call those people and see if we could get it done like that.
Yeah.
But we'll do it.
I had every confidence. I sent Teresa in confidence tense that information. But of course, before it goes out, I wanted to make sure, in spite of my confidence, so I didn't be presumptive or not discuss it with you first.
Yeah, if you'll leave me as the contact, then I'll go ahead and I'll make sure that I get my committee members.
Well, I'm going to have Teresa reach out to you because I want everything to funnel through her, because most people
rather
will
than
go
have
by
a
the
bunch of contacts, let us do one.
I did pick up High Holiday book for Carol Pock, but Teresa has it written down.
Okay.
And I have it here, and I'm going to meet with Carol this week sometime, and I'll exchange it with her. But I have another question.
Yes, ma'am.
There are some people who come to services every Friday night, but who do not have a book. Is it possible for them to check out a book?
Of course.
A holiday book? I think.
Now, what we're asking, when you see the Zoom links go out for the high holidays, we're asking everyone to register with Teresa, because someone has to manage it on the back end and admit these people in the waiting room. So if Stuart sends the link to Aunt Josie in California because she wants to participate, but the administrator doesn't know who Aunt Josie is, and in this world of Zoom bombing, we want to know who everyone is who's coming in, and that's why we got the enhanced Zoom, because we could easily have more than 100 participants. So that's also what, when you see the Zoom links go out, people will need to just register their names with Teresa. So if your family members outside of the local area, or let's say people who were members of Beth Shalom and have moved away, whatever the case may be, they're certainly welcome and encouraged to participate in our service as long as they register their name.
I have a question, because I assume it's going through Sherry's computer. Is that who's gonna? Because she's doing this. Where's it going? What computer is it going through?
Well, when you click on the Zoom, it's just like now. There's a host, and it doesn't matter what computer it's going through. But Jordan Zadwick, as ritual chair, is going to be the one who's going to administer it in the back end, just like he does for me on Saturday services.
Okay, I'm just not sure about, because I don't know, about Zoom handling, 150 people. I assume that's not an issue.
Well, that's why we purchased the enhanced Zoom capabilities. So it's a non-issue now. But we did it because if Cookie wants to schedule, let's say a sisterhood event and brotherhood event, we both want Sunday morning at 10. We can now do that, where before we couldn't have two programs running simultaneously.
Okay.
And that will also give Stephanie the ability to have longer Zoom classes with religious school than the 30-minute section she was chopping it up. So you could have two classes running concurrently and have hour lessons or so on.
Okay,
so
another
we've
thing
increased.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
No, I was just going to say that was, and the board approved it unanimously, the additional expense to do that.
Okay, while we're talking about delivering Moxorim, we might also see if anybody needs a Siddur for Friday night service or Saturday morning service, because while we're delivering, we could do both.
Of course.
Right.
Yes,
We can get more participation, because we like to have readers read with us if we can, to get more people involved.
And by the way, your service was beautiful, lovely Friday night. It's obvious you spend a lot of time preparing for that, to get all these people on the same page with the readings. Your Devar Torah was great, very thoughtful.
I was so nervous when I saw you were there. Oh my God. I thought, oh my God. It's like the student and the teacher, you know, you want to do good in front of your teacher.
Well, you done good, girl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I told Andrea, I want to be on services Friday night because I know Janet spends a lot of time on her Devar, and I'd really like to hear her Devar.
Well, thank you.
I told her she should be doing some on Saturday mornings, but not pushing.
Well, if Janet was inclined to join us on Saturday mornings, then I would love to extend that opportunity to Janet, not to speak to you in third person while you're right here.
No, but I appreciate that. Well, we'll see what, you know, we'll see.
She always does a good job.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time, Stuart, you know, it takes a lot of time, and I'm always looking for new sources and stuff, and, you know, this has really been very helpful, though, I will say, because I'm really now understanding it a whole lot more. But, and I enjoy doing it. I really enjoy it.
Honestly, I'm so pleased to see Lily Weiner every Monday in Torah study, because Lily is what I would call more of a quote-unquote secular Jew, not real learned in Torah. And the fact that she comes back week after week is very, I just makes me warm inside.
Well, you make Torah real. I mean, especially there's certain parsha that really are more meaty and
yes, ma'am,
more modern. So that it's like, oh, like now I know. Okay, that's where that came from. Oh, that's where, you know, like not writing God's name and destroying the paper that you write it on. Why do we do that? Because the Torah tells us.
Correct.
You know, it's an amazing, amazing, amazing document that it's got. And this is what I tell people who are not Jewish. The Torah has rules and laws for everything, down to the
all in there
detail. And it's just gratifying to know that there's a source that has, we may not understand it, but it's got all the answers.
But that's why I continually emphasize you have to have different Torahs or with different commentaries. You can't understand what the Torah is trying to tell us without the oral Torah, without the insights of our sages. It's just, that's where the Christians don't get it. So,
you know, it's funny, I didn't want to say anything in front of Michelle, but when you were talking about not drinking the blood, and I was thinking about, I think in the Catholic Church, they do the communion thing or something where this is
it's symbolic
this,
blood.
The wine is his blood. And I was thinking,
yes,
ooh, that's kind of weird.
Well, remember, Christianity is a pagan religion, regardless of what they say.
Well, it's idolatry.
They believe in three gods, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost.
Yeah.
To me, the fact that tattooing is so prevalent today harkens back to the pagans. And I dare say most Christians, and sadly many Jews that tattoo themselves, don't understand the pagan origins of tattooing. And body,
you're saying and all that.
Body.
Yeah. So. One last thing. I said to Jerry, oh, we're almost finished with reading the Torah. And he said, so, you know, you start again. He said, isn't it like the same thing? I said, well, no, because we do, according to the triennial, we can go through the whole thing. But I said, every time you read it, you discover something new. So even though you kind of know what's going to happen and you know the story, it's like you just, you know, I don't remember breakfast this morning, so much less, you know, but it just makes it so much more real when you kind of have a memory of, oh yeah.
Tell Jerry, if he wants to sit in with you, I'll cut the price in half.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen, but he's definitely a secular Jew.
Yeah, no, we need all Jews, every Jew. Every Jew is important. Every Jew has a purpose and a reason for being here.
Hey, he gave me three Jewish kids, so I'm happy.
Right,
with
exactly, exactly.
Good.
Well, thank you, ladies, and I will also let Teresa know to add the Cedarim to the what I sent out.
Yes, good idea. Okay.
Appreciate you all very much.
You as well. Thank you, Stuart.
Good rest of the week.
Yep.
And to you.
Bye.